Well, basically what we're seeking to do there is to move away from the sort of the groupthink, if you like, that has followed the implementation of the MDGs, which has been very focused on looking at, building on the idea that there was a gap in money and a gap in finance, and that gap could be filled by ODA. And what we're saying here is taking a step back from that and saying, actually, development processes are financed by far more than just ODA, and we need to look at the evolution of all the different types of finance. And we group it under 4 headings, which is what the UN uses now. So international public finance, international private finance, domestic public finance, and domestic private finance, and group everything under that. And if you look at the figures, what you see since the start of the MDGs is that the biggest increase has been actually in domestic public finance. So tax revenue, in other words, has really been what has paid for the vast bulk of the improvements on the MDGs. So that's the first thing, to look at it in terms of a more holistic view of the finance and not just focus on one small element. The second point is, of course, is that ODA really is a small element. In the report, we show that the domestic public finance increase is by far the biggest increase, and then private finance, both domestic and public, have increased, whereas ODA there's only been a small increase. And if you're really going to take a good view of development, you need to look at all 4. The other thing that we've done is to not just look at so much money, and we need that much money, and what's the gap between them, but to say, well, what is it that really pushes development? What are the enablers of development? And how are they financed? How are they best financed? And we took 6 examples of different types of enablers, like in human capital development or infrastructure, and green energy we took as another example. So just 6 we took. And when you look at those, you realize that there are different patterns of finance for each one. So when you're, it's not a simple single solution that you need. You need a more complex approach, which picks up different ways of financing for different types of enablers. When you use money, when you use finance, you shouldn't just be focusing on the money, but you should also look at the way it's used and the policies around it. I mean, money is never just, finance is never just use and avoid. It's good policies, bad policies, policies that waste money, there's policies that actually money goes much further. And one of these is a government or an institution's ability to absorb finance. Does it have the right capacities to actually make the investments required? You'll often hear development bankers say, people from the World Bank or the African Development Bank say, what we lack is not the money, it's actually the good proposals, the good bankable proposals. So, and that usually, if you trace it back, you realize that it's a lack of capacity, that the people who want to build the infrastructure or a road or set up a school or something, their ability, their capacities to actually show how the money is going to be properly used with a proper business plan and so on, that sort of basic capacity is often lacking. And then, of course, you need the capacity to implement. So there are, at different levels, capacity is very important. Well, I think, first of all, that there should be a real recognition that the finance goes together with policies, and effective policies tend to encourage more finance, that it isn't just a gap in finance, that's the problem, but it's the way we use it. So that recognition is very important, and then that has to be written into the long term. In a sense, that recognition was already there in the Millennium Declaration and in the Monterey Consensus document, which is the last, the first Financing for Development conference. But then we didn't go on thinking like that. We started to focus more and more on the ODA, and ODA as a solution to all our problems. And so you need to agree some sort of framework for monitoring, accountability and review, which will carry that story forward and hold governments accountable to it. not in a legal sense, but we're not going to get an agreement which is legally binding, but in a sense where other actors can interrogate governments. So they need the information through the media and through public education, public awareness. We need fora in which different actors around the table can question each other, where governments recognize that it's important to be open and transparent. And it's not just developing countries, but also our own governments are willing to be open and transparent.